Hello, everybody, and welcome to a reading of The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. So, I'm going to be playing a reading by Basil Rathbone because I think he does a better job than I would do reading this. But I will pause it periodically to go over the question and notes. So, you'll see on one side of the page we have the story, and on the other side of the page we have all sorts of good questions here, and sometimes you'll be highlighting to kind of get the gist of what's going on and also delve a little bit deeper.
1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could. But when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length, I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled, and the very definiteness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong.
Okay, so let's take a peek here at what's going on. So the very first thing he does is he's talking about the 1,000 injuries. So there's this man, Fortunato, who in some way has injured the narrator 1,000 times, supposedly. Right? He might be using a little hyperbole there. But then when he insults Montresor, the name of our narrator, he vowed to take revenge. So his motivation here is he's going to get some kind of revenge on Fortunato. Now he makes a point down here. A wrong is unredressed. In other words, when you're trying to right a wrong, it's not really righted if that person doesn't realize how badly they had done wrong. So he doesn't want to be caught, but he wants to make sure that this guy really does suffer for what's happening. And he doesn't want to have any punishment befall him because he feels like he's already gotten the brunt of the bad stuff here. Let's resume.
It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship of wine. In this respect I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk, one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much.
All right, we have a little bit of a difference here between the reading that was done and what you're seeing here. But let's go ahead and look up above here. How are the actions of the narrator different from his motivation? Well, he wants to get revenge, but if you notice here, he does not give Fortunato any cause to believe that he's going to do him poorly. So he says that he has no doubt of his goodwill. Right? He keeps a smile on his face, even though his real smile is because he's thinking of the immolation or destruction of Fortunato. Okay. Now, what is Fortunato like? Well, we have here a few things. He's a man to be respected and feared. He is proud. And even though when it comes to things like painting, he's not so great, he's a quack. Kind of that's another way of saying like a charlatan or someone who's trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes. But he's also a virtuoso when it comes to wine. Like he knows his stuff. And the narrator claims that he does as well. All right. What country are they likely in? Well, he mentions mostly Italians, and we know they're at Carnival, and so they are likely in Italy or nearby.
The man wore motley. He had a tight-fitting party striped dress, and his head was surmounted by a laconical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you're looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible. In the middle of the carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied. "And I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain."
All right. So you'll notice up here, what's happening is it's carnival season, right? So this is where they dress up and they go out and they have a good time. You might have heard of Carnival in Brazil, for example. But they go out and they just party, basically. So that's what's happening here. And how he's behaving, he accosted me with excessive warmth, right? So he's probably tipsy. He's very excited to see him. And he's wearing this motley here. So it's looking to highlight the description of Fortunato's motley, right? So tight-fitting party striped dress. Not a dress as in a woman's dress, but dress as in attire. He had his cap that had bells on it, right? So if you've ever heard of the Motley Fool, for example, or if you've ever seen jokers from old Renaissance times or medieval times, they kind of wear this kit, is what they call it, of motley.
"Amontillado? I have my doubts." "Amontillado?" And I must satisfy them. "Amontillado. As you're engaged, I'm on my way to Lucchese. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me, Lucchese cannot tell Amontillado from sherry. And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "Oh, my dear friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive that you have an engagement. Lucchese, I have no engagement. Come." "My friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado? Oh, you've been imposed upon. And as for Lucchese, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado."
All right, so let's go back up here and get some of this good stuff down. All right, what is a pipe of Amontillado or Amontillado, depending on your pronunciation? They're actually using more of kind of a Spanish pronunciation than Italian, I believe, but I could be wrong. But basically a pipe is like 130 gallons, so you see this giant barrel. That's quite a lot of Amontillado, and Amontillado is a type of sherry. So as they're describing this, right, he's saying, how impossible in the middle of carnival? Like, how did you be able to get this? And he said, well, I paid the full price and maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I was afraid I'd lose a bargain, right? And of course they have doubts. So what they're showing about this is Amontillado must be a rather rare sherry, something that's very, very expensive and hard to come by, especially during Carnival when a lot of people have already ordered all their stuff, their food and wine and whatnot. So it's kind of a rare one. Now, the excuse, of course, that the narrator has for being so happy to run into Fortunato, he's planned this. He's got something set up for Fortunato. But the excuse he's using is, hey, look, I know you're really busy, you're on your way somewhere. I really wanted to consult you about this because I want you to taste it because I know you're so good at being able to tell the difference between real Amontillado and just plain cherry. So his excuse is that he really wanted him to help him out with determining if this is the real deal, if it's authentic. Now, you notice here he's kind of leading Fortunato on because he goes, oh, you have something to do. You're engaged, which means not maritally. It means you have an engagement to go to. You have something that you have planned to do. And I didn't want to bother you, so I'm going to go to this other guy. Now, he knows that Fortunato looks down on the other guy, Lucchese. Right? But he knows that if he brings up the name, this will make Fortunato more likely to be like, no, don't go to him, come to me. We're going to do this together. right? So he's making sure to really hook Fortunato. And it says, "Come, let us go," whither means where, to your vaults. So underneath this house that our narrator has are very deep vaults where you might keep your wine and other things. There are other things there you're going to discover that they keep in these vaults. All right. Now here, as Fortunato is coughing and seems to be affected by the damp, he's pretending to be concerned. And that's because he wants to really hook in the fact that Fortunato thinks that they're good, they're kind of friends, associates at least. And so he wants to make sure that he seems like he cares about Fortunato, even though we both know that he is looking for revenge.
Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm. Putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned.
All right. So, going up here, if you notice, this is a roquelaire, what he's wearing here with this big cape. And so, as tradition of dressing up for Carnival, this is what he's wearing. And so they go to his palazzo, or his place where he lives. And one of the preparations that he makes here is that he tells his attendants, and in other words, the people who work in his house, maybe he has a maid, these kinds of things, right? He tells them, whatever you do, don't go anywhere, right? Which, of course, they all want to go to Carnival, so they all leave. So he makes sure that no one is home. So now, the next question asks, what do you think he's going to do to Fortunato? How far is he going to go to get his revenge? And let's resume.
I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent and stood together on the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe," he said. "It's further on," said I. "But observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of his intoxication. "Nitre?" he asked at length. "Nitre," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It's nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said, "we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchese.
Okay, let's pause there for a moment and go up. All right. So the first question here, what do you think flambeau means in this passage? And you can see these 2 men are holding these torches, right? And so a sconce basically is something that would hold a light, or in this case a fire, so that you could see. So he gets 2 of these flambeaux to carry with them so they can go down into this dark vault. Notice what's here. Not only is this a little foreshadowing, but this also kind of is going into what's going to happen when they get deeper into this vault. All right. What is the vault like? Well, we're looking here, long winding staircase at length to the foot of a descent, standing on the damp ground. So it's a very damp, dark, very long ways into this vault. All right. So when we look at the shape Fortunato's in, we have two things. The gait, meaning his walking, was unsteady because he's tipsy. He's a little drunk, right? Also, on top of that, all that coughing, we can tell his health is not very good. Down here, he brings up going back and going and seeing this other guy instead, Lucrezi. But Fortunato does not like Lucrezi, as you remember. And so the reason he's bringing it up is to again continue to hook Fortunato into the idea of wanting to be the one who tells him whether or not this Amontillado is genuine.
He said, the cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True, I replied. But you should use all proper caution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle, which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. Drink, I said, presenting the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly, while his bells jingled. I drink, he said, to the buried that repose around us. And I to your long life. He again took my arm, and we proceeded. These vaults, he said, are extensive. The Montresors, I replied, were a great and numerous family. Oh, I forget your arms. Ah, a huge human foot d'or in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel. And the motto? Nemo me impune lacessit. No one provokes me with impunity. Oh, good, he said.
All right. So going back up here, we see some dramatic irony. And what that means is that a character doesn't know what's happening. So, for example, Fortunato does not know that he is going to be the subject of revenge. So, Montresor knows that Fortunato will not die of the cough. How do you think that he knows this cough will not kill him? Go ahead and answer that question. Now, something interesting here is he has a draft of Medoc. Medoc is another type of wine that he's offering him. So it's wine after wine after wine. And Medoc actually was believed that if you had a little bit, it would actually be good for your health to have a little Medoc, right? So he's making that point of, here, have some of this. It's good for you. All right. Now, we know that Montresor does not like Fortunato. So why do you think he says that he drinks to his long life? It's not just a case of him trying to pretend to be nice. There's something deeper there. But you go ahead and answer what you think that is. All right. So they're getting deeper and deeper into the vaults. And he says it. They're extensive. They're very huge. And so Montresor says, hey, our family was a very large family. So that's why we have such huge vaults. And so when they're talking about arms, if you were from a family that had higher status, your family would have this arm, right? The arms basically show that they're someone of importance. And here you've got that golden foot stepping on a snake in azure or blue field, and the snake in turn biting the heel. And then you get this idea from the motto, no one provokes me with impunity. So in other words, if you're the snake and someone bites or steps on you, you turn around and you bite them, right? And that has a lot to do with what's going on. So if you think about the very beginning, how does this idea tie in to what Montresor is planning to do? All right. And then it asks you to highlight the description of this portion of the vault. So we can go in here, extensive. There should be more down here. Here we go. We have long walls piled of skeletons. with casks and puncheons. Puncheons are like small poles that hold up the ceiling. And then we have, these are catacombs. So literally they keep the bones of their dead relatives lining the vault. Kind of weird. We don't do that kind of thing today.
The wine sparkled in his eyes and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. We had passed through walls of piled bones with casks and puncheons intermingling into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by the arm above the elbow. The night, I said, see, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough. It's nothing, he said. Let us go. But first, another draught to the Medoc. I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upward with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend, he said. Not I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. How? You are not of the Masons. Yes, I replied. Yes. You? Impossible. A Mason? A Mason, I replied. A sign, he said. It is this, I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire. Ah, you jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again, arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than flame.
Okay, let's go up a bit here. So we've got niter as a chemical, and it can make it very hard to breathe, right? It actually stifles some of the oxygen in your blood as it's trying to get up into your brain. So how do we see this niter affecting Fortunato's health? Well, we see he's coughing. He's coughing profusely, which is not a good thing, especially if you have any other kind of breathing issues. It could end up taking his life. And then we have Montresor giving Fortunato all this wine. Why does he keep giving him wine? What do you think? Now here he makes a gesture, and Montresor does not understand the gesture. And so Fortunato asks if he's a part of the Brotherhood. Now the Brotherhood here are the Masons, right? It's a group of individuals who are, it's kind of like today how part of a union, and there was a union of Freemasons as well. So that's basically what that is. And he shows, yes, I am a Mason. Look, I have a trowel under my cloak. A trowel here is what you would use to apply mortar to bricks or stones. So my question here for you is, why is Montresor carrying a trowel? I mean, is that just something people do? Kind of odd. Why do you think he has it? And then down here, given all the details about Montresor's vault, what conclusion can you draw about it? Well, we know it's very damp. It's full of niter, which is not a very healthy thing. And it's also enormous.
At the most remote end of the crypt, there appeared another, less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the old catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall, thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination, the feeble light did not enable us to see. Proceed, I said. Here is the Amontillado. As for Lucchese, well, he's an ignoramus, interrupted my friend, as he stepped unsteadily forward while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant, he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astonished to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. Pass your hand, I said, over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power. The Amontillado! Ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. True, I replied. The Amontillado.
All right. So our first thing up here, let me make sure I'm not missing anything here. Okay, so the 3 walls are lined basically with bones. Now all 4 walls would have been lined with bones, except for he knocked down a bunch. Right, so they have bones of their dead relatives down there. And then the size of this, we've got it about 4 feet, 3 feet wide, about 6 or 7 feet high. So why is he describing this interior with so much detail, this little tiny, not even a room, it's a recess? Well, there's something important about it. And then when we look at the visibility down here, he's trying to see into the depth, but the light it's not very good down there. So the visibility is very poor. And that's why it's easy for Montresor to convince him that there's still some Amontillado in there. All right. So all of a sudden he goes and he realizes, wait a minute, where's the Amontillado and why is this such a tiny little recess? Because he's never been down this far into this guy's vault. So that makes him quite bewildered, because all of a sudden he runs into this rock wall. Now, what is Montresor doing? Fettered means to chain or to bind. So you have these 2 iron staples that are hanging up, and they're about 2 feet across from each other. And so there's a chain and a padlock. And so he throws the chain around this guy's waist and secures it and locks him in. So you can see that Montresor does not have very good intentions here. And he's kind of teasing him here, because he's like, let me implore you to go back. Oh, you're not going to go back with me? Oh, then I guess I'm just going to have to leave you. Right? So he's teasing him in a really nasty way, because he's chained him down into this recess. And I think Fortunato, having been kind of drunk, doesn't quite know what this guy's doing or what's even happening to him.
As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I've before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance to the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier and the third and the fourth. Then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with more satisfaction, I ceased my labours and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within.
So this is not looking too good for Fortunato. So what he's hidden here is down below the bones. Once he moves the bones aside, he's hidden stone and mortar, which you use to build walls and such. And why has he done this? Well, he's done this because he's going to build a wall to block Fortunato into this little, they call it a niche, they call it a recess, they call it the inside vault. But this little area, he's built this wall. Now, this isn't really open. It's only open as a diagram for you to see. But this would be also walled up. All right? So Montresor is building this wall around him. And the thing you have to think is he doing this just to freak Fortunato out? To give him a good scare? And he stops and he listens for a moment. I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. So he stops to listen to Fortunato straining against the chains and trying to get out.
A succession of loud and shrill screams bursting suddenly from the throat of the chain form seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this. And the clamorer grew still.
All right. So his reaction here at first is he hesitated and he trembled. And he takes out his knife and he begins to kind of grope around. And he kind of panics for a moment there. And he seems to be feeling a sense that, this is definitely not a good thing that he's doing. And then as Fortunato begins to yell, he begins to yell also. And he yells louder and he yells longer than Fortunato can. And it's almost like he's making fun of Fortunato in this unfortunate state of his.
It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position, but now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, a very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo over our wine. The Amontillado, I said. Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be waiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone. Yes, Yes, I said. Let us be gone. For the love of God, Montressor. Yes, I said. For the love of God. But with these words, I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud. Fortunato! No answer. I called again. Fortunato! No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. On account of the dampness of the catacombs, I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat.
Oof, that's rough. All right. So coming down into here, we've got Fortunato speaks in a sad voice, and yet he's laughing. He doesn't want to believe that this is really happening. And he wants to feel that this is just a joke and that Montresor will let him out. And they go up, right? And he says, it's a very good joke, an excellent jest. We'll laugh about it in the future, over our wine. And he's trying to laugh, but he has a sense that this man isn't really joking. He also mentions, won't they be waiting for us? My wife and the other people, they'll be expecting us. And this is something that someone would say when they're in a sense like this, being victimized. Right? And then he says, for the love of God, Montresor. And he says, yes, for the love of God. Why does he reply? That's kind of a strange way. And I think that in this case, he's kind of feeling like he's the righteous one here. That he's taking over the place of God when it comes to doling out punishment. All right. Now here he says, my heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. So he's blaming the catacombs, the dampness, but that's not really why his heart is sick. He knows what he's doing is wrong and grotesque, and it's not something any man should do to another. And yet, he continues doing it. All right. So looking at this, how does Montresor's dialogue tend to differ from his internal dialogue, right? So we're going to compare these examples. In internal monologue, the narrator states, the 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. So we know in his mind that this whole time, his entire motivation is to get revenge. He's already hidden everything down there. He's already got a ploy for how to get this guy down here. But then in his dialogue, he sounds very different. I said to him, my dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. Right? So he's flattering him. And when he talks about, he wishes he could have consulted him, right? You're the expert. You're looking great. You're amazing, right? I wish I had had you around for this bargain that I hoped I was getting. So here in this flattery, he's sounding very kind. He sounds like the type of person that perhaps Fortunato is friends with. But really, that is not the case. He means Fortunato ill. All right. Now, how does Montresor's dialogue lull Fortunato in thinking they're friends? Because he's using flattery, right? Calls him an expert, calls him well-loved, calls him important and powerful. So by acting as if he's looking up to this guy thinks they're friends. How does his narration and internal monologue show his attempt to justify his actions? Because the whole time he's talking about how, he's going to do this thing, and that even though he knows it's wrong, because you get that with his heart feeling sick about it, you get that with him getting trembly and hesitant, he still feels that he's been wrong and he needs to act upon it. If he had not thought he was doing wrong, then why did he take such pains to make sure no one would know that he led Fortunato down into his vault? So he's definitely trying to justify what he's doing, even though he knows full well he is wrong. Well, I hope you guys like the story. It's another sick and twisted tale by Edgar Allan Poe. What's interesting to note here with the coughing and, the niter and such is this is something he wrote after he knew his wife had tuberculosis. And after I think it was his adopted mother, Ms. Allen, actually died of tuberculosis. And so this was kind of something that he had to deal with all his life, were people dying around him. And I think that kind of colored who he was, and the fact that he wrote so many really disturbing pieces. I mean, who really is going to wall someone up to die in the deep depth of the catacombs of their home to add to the bones of their dead relatives? That's kind of creepy. Alright, you guys, if you need to watch it again, go for it.